don't care what that ticket says. People like you don't belong in first class.
The words cut through the luxurious cabin of Executive Airlines Flight 445 like a knife through silk. They came from Sophia Winters, 28 years old. Blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon designer uniform tailored to showcase her figure. Her manicured nails drummed against the galley counter as she stared down at the woman in seat 1A with undisguised contempt. Victoria Knight didn't flinch. She sat calmly in the cream leather seat, wearing faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt that had seen better days. Her canvas sneakers were scuffed, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The black backpack at her feet looked like something a college student might carry. To anyone watching, she appeared completely out of place in the opulent first-class cabin of Executive Airlines' flagship route from Miami to New York. "Ma'am, I have a valid boarding pass for this seat," Victoria said quietly, her voice steady despite the public humiliation. Around them, other first-class passengers had stopped their conversations. Some pretended to read magazines while stealing glances, others openly stared. Sophia's perfectly glossed lips curved into a sneer. "Valid, honey. I've seen enough fake tickets to spot one from a mile away. That boarding pass might fool the machines, but it doesn't fool me." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to what she thought was a whisper, but was loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I know your type. You probably found that ticket in the trash or bought it from some scammer online." Victoria's hands remained folded in her lap. No tension in her shoulders, no anger in her eyes, just a calm that seemed almost otherworldly given the circumstances. "I'd like to speak to the captain," Victoria said. "The captain?" Sophia laughed a sharp sound that echoed off the curved walls. "Oh, you'll speak to the captain all right. Captain Rodriguez is going to want to know how someone like you got past security with stolen credentials." From the cockpit emerged Captain Miguel Rodriguez, 45, with salt and pepper hair and the authoritative bearing of someone used to being obeyed without question. His uniform was crisp, his expression stern as he approached. "What seems to be the problem here, Sophia?" he asked, though his eyes had already settled on Victoria with suspicion. "This woman is trying to steal a first-class seat, Captain. I've asked her politely to move to economy where she belongs, but she's being difficult." Captain Rodriguez studied Victoria's boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny. "This does seem unusual," he said. "A last-minute first-class ticket purchase, no luggage and appropriate attire." He handed the pass back to Sophia. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move to the appropriate section of the aircraft." "The appropriate section?" Victoria repeated softly. "You know what I mean," Rodriguez said. At that moment, flight attendant Jessica Park approached. 26, with auburn hair and nervous energy, she carried herself like someone eager to please authority figures. "Captain." "I can help resolve this," Jessica offered. "I'll escort her to economy. There are still some middle seats available." "I'm not moving," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow commanding the attention of everyone within earshot. Sophia's face flushed red. "Excuse me, did you just refuse a direct order from the captain?" "I refused nothing. I stated a fact. I'm not moving because this is my seat. This is my airline. And in exactly 3 minutes, you're all going to understand why that matters." The confidence in her voice gave Sophia pause for just a moment, just long enough for doubt to flicker across her perfectly made-up features. But the moment passed, replaced by indignation. "Your airline?" Sophia scoffed. "What's next? Are you going to tell us you're the Queen of England?" Victoria pulled out her phone and typed a single message. The movement was so subtle that only the passengers in the immediate vicinity noticed. "Call security," Sophia commanded Jessica. "Call the gate agent. This woman is delusional and clearly dangerous." David Thompson. The gate agent arrived within minutes. 32, thin and nervous, he carried a tablet and the air of someone who desperately wanted to be anywhere else. "What's the situation?" he asked. "We have a passenger in the wrong seat who refuses to move," Captain Rodriguez explained. "Claims she owns the airline." David looked at Victoria, taking in her casual appearance. "Ma'am, if you don't have proper documentation for this seat, I'll need to ask you to check your tablet." Victoria interrupted. "Look up the passenger manifest for seat 1A. David tapped his screen, frowning. It says, "Victoria Knight VIP status." He looked confused. "But this must be an error. The system sometimes—" "There's no error," Victoria said. Sophia snatched the tablet from David's hands. "This is obviously fake. Anyone can hack these systems. I've seen it before." "You've seen someone hack Executive Airlines' passenger manifest system?" Victoria asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, no, but—" "Then perhaps you should be more careful about making accusations you can't support." The tension in the cabin was becoming unbearable. Other passengers whispered among themselves. Someone had started recording with their phone. Sophia noticed the camera, and her behavior became even more theatrical. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption," she announced to the cabin. "We're dealing with an individual who has gained unauthorized access to our aircraft. For your safety and comfort, we'll have this resolved momentarily." Victoria stood up slowly. At 5'6", she wasn't particularly tall, but something about her presence suddenly filled the entire space. Conversations stopped. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed to fade. "Sophia," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of first class, "I want you to remember this moment. Remember how you felt when you decided I didn't belong here. Remember the assumptions you made. Remember the words you used." "Are you threatening me?" Sophia's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply asking you to remember. Because in approximately 90 seconds, you're going to understand exactly who you've been talking to, and that memory is going to be very important for you." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to sit down or deplane immediately." Victoria looked at him with what might have been pity. "Captain Rodriguez, I need you to call your operations center. Tell them that Victoria Knight requires immediate assistance on Flight 445. I'm not calling anyone for Victoria." Held up her hand. "Actually, never mind. They're already on their way." As if summoned by her words, footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving quickly. "Sophia." Captain Rodriguez, Jessica, and David all turned toward the aircraft door. Their expressions shifted from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. "This will be a moment you remember for the rest of your lives," Victoria said quietly, settling back into her seat. "Not because I'm vindictive, but because you're about to learn that dignity and respect aren't determined by the price of someone's clothes or the color of their skin." The footsteps were getting closer. Sophia's hands began to shake. Victoria Knight had purchased Executive Airlines 6 weeks ago for $2.1 billion. The acquisition barely made news because Knight Technologies, her primary company, acquired businesses the way other people bought coffee, frequently and without fanfare. But this purchase was different. This purchase was personal. At 35, Victoria was worth $8.2 billion. She had built her fortune from scratch, starting with a computer science degree from MIT earned on a full scholarship. Growing up in Detroit with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Victoria had learned early that the world made assumptions about what she could and couldn't achieve. Those assumptions had been wrong then. They were still wrong now. The journey from her dorm room startup to Knight Technologies' 60-story headquarters in downtown Chicago hadn't been easy. Every boardroom she'd entered as a young entrepreneur, she'd faced the same doubt, the same skeptical looks, the same questions about whether she was really qualified to be there. She'd learned to let her work speak for itself, to remain calm under pressure, to never let anyone else's limitations become her own. But air travel had always been different. There was something about airports and airlines that brought out the worst in people. The arbitrary power dynamics, the snap judgments based on appearance, the assumption that certain types of people belonged in certain sections. Victoria had experienced it all. The extra security screenings, the suspicious looks from gate agents, the surprise from flight crews when she appeared in first class. 3 months ago, she'd received an anonymous email. A current executive airlines employee, too afraid to identify themselves, had detailed a culture of discrimination that went far beyond occasional rudeness. The email included names, dates, specific incidents. Passengers of color being randomly selected for additional screening, concerns about seating assignments that mysteriously only affected minorities, complaints that disappeared into corporate bureaucracy without investigation. Victoria had made some calls, discreet inquiries through her network of contacts in the aviation industry. What she learned made her angry, but more than that, it made her determined. Executive Airlines wasn't just enabling discrimination, they were profiting from it. Their exclusive brand image was built on keeping certain people out. So she'd bought them, not to destroy them, but to transform them. Victoria believed in the power of change from within, but first she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. Hence today's test flight. The culture at Executive Airlines ran deeper than most people realized. Marcus Vale, the operations manager, had been with the company for 15 years. A 52-year-old career airline executive, he'd built his reputation on maintaining what he called standards. Those standards, it turned out, had less to do with safety or service, and more to do with ensuring that Executive Airlines clientele remained sufficiently exclusive. Elena Ramirez worked in customer relations. 29 years old, she'd started as a gate agent and worked her way up. Her job description said she was supposed to resolve passenger complaints. In reality, she'd become expert at making certain types of complaints disappear. Bias incidents were reclassified as misunderstandings. Discrimination became policy clarifications. Outright harassment was filed under isolated incidents that don't reflect company values. The training materials told the story. Victoria had acquired copies during her due diligence process. New employees weren't explicitly told to discriminate, but they were taught to recognize brand-appropriate passengers. They learned to identify potential security risks using criteria that correlated suspiciously with race and economic status. They were instructed to maintain the ambiance of the premium cabin experience. It was discrimination with plausible deniability, sophisticated bias with corporate polish. Sophia Winters exemplified the culture perfectly. Hired 2 years ago specifically for her appearance and ability to project the right image, she'd quickly learned that certain passengers were more welcome than others. Her performance reviews praised her for maintaining cabin standards and ensuring passenger comfort. The metrics were subtle but clear, minimize complaints from high-value customers, even if it meant creating problems for others. Captain Rodriguez had noticed the patterns, but convinced himself it wasn't his concern. Pilots flew planes. Customer service was someone else's responsibility. When his crew made seating adjustments or flagged passengers for additional screening, he told himself it was about safety and security, not discrimination. Self-deception was easier than acknowledging complicity. The investigation Victoria had commissioned after the anonymous email revealed damning statistics. Minority passengers on Executive Airlines were 3 times more likely to be selected for additional security screening. Complaints about discrimination were resolved in favor of the airline 97% of the time. Employee surveys revealed that 73% of staff believed certain passengers didn't fit the brand image. But the most telling discovery was the internal communications. Email threads where managers discussed problematic passengers using coded language. Memos about maintaining demographic balance in premium cabins. Training documents that emphasized cultural sensitivity while teaching staff to profile passengers based on appearance. Victoria had seen enough. The test flight was carefully planned to document the discrimination firsthand. She'd chosen Flight 445 specifically because it had generated the most complaints. She'd worn her most casual clothes to trigger the biases she knew existed. She'd booked Seat 1A, the most visible seat in first class, to ensure maximum exposure. James Mitchell, her head of corporate security, was monitoring everything remotely. Former FBI Mitchell specialized in documenting evidence for civil rights cases. Hidden cameras were already in place throughout the aircraft. Audio recording equipment captured every word. The legal team was standing by. But Victoria wasn't interested in simply proving discrimination existed. She wanted to understand how it felt, how it operated, how it could be dismantled. She wanted to experience firsthand what her customers faced so she could build something better. The anonymous employee who'd first contacted her had included a prescient observation. It's not enough to change the policies. You have to change the people. And to change the people, you have to show them who they really are. Victoria was about to do exactly that. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca Torres, her Chief Operating Officer teams in position. Legal ready. Media contacts standing by. Are you sure you want to proceed? Victoria typed back. More sure than I've ever been about anything. The transformation of Executive Airlines had actually begun weeks before Victoria stepped onto Flight 445. New hiring practices were already being implemented. Bias training programs were in development. Customer service protocols were being rewritten. The infrastructure for change was in place. But infrastructure wasn't enough. Culture changed one interaction at a time, one moment of accountability at a time. Today was about accountability. Victoria looked around the first-class cabin. She saw Sophia conferring with Captain Rodriguez in hushed tones. She saw Jessica nervously adjusting her uniform. She saw David checking and rechecking his tablet. She saw the other passengers pretending not to watch while obviously fascinated by the unfolding drama. In a few minutes, all of their lives were going to change. Sophia's career in aviation would be over. Rodriguez would face a federal investigation. Elena and Marcus would discover that enabling discrimination had consequences. Jessica and David would learn that complicity carried a price. But Victoria wasn't focused on punishment. She was focused on prevention. Today's events would become training materials. The documentation would be used to educate future employees about the cost of bias. The story would spread throughout the aviation industry as an example of what happened when discrimination was exposed. More importantly, it would show other victims of discrimination that justice was possible. That quiet dignity could triumph over loud prejudice. That having power meant using it to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The footsteps from the jet bridge were getting closer. Victoria closed her eyes and thought about her mother, who'd never lived to see her daughter become successful enough to buy an airline. About the scholarship that had changed her life. About all the young people who deserved the same opportunities she'd had. This wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. For herself, for her customers, and even for the people who were about to lose their jobs. Sometimes destruction was necessary before reconstruction could begin. Victoria opened her eyes and prepared to change everything. Security is on the way. Sophia announced loudly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed she held all the power in the situation. She crossed her arms and positioned herself in the aisle, effectively blocking Victoria's path to anywhere else on the aircraft. And when they get here, you're going to be escorted off this plane in handcuffs. Victoria remained seated, her expression unchanged. I see. That's all you have to say? Sophia's voice rose an octave. I see, lady. You're about to be arrested for fraud, trespassing, and probably half a dozen other charges. You should be begging for mercy right now. Doesn't it? Victoria asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Something about her tone, calm, almost curious, made several passengers lean forward. Jessica Park fidgeted with her badge, suddenly uncertain. David Thompson stared at his tablet screen as if it might reveal some hidden truth. "Stop playing games," Sophia snapped. "I've dealt with people like you before. You think if you act calm and mysterious, we'll back down. Well, we won't. I know exactly what you are." "What am I?" "Sophia." The use of her name startled the flight attendant. She hadn't introduced herself. Victoria had somehow known who she was. "You're a scammer," Sophia said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "A con artist who preys on airlines by—" "By what?" Victoria interrupted gently. "By sitting quietly in a seat with a valid boarding pass. By speaking respectfully to crew members. By not raising my voice or using profanity or threatening anyone. By pretending to be someone you're not. Who am I pretending to be?" Sophia's mouth opened, then closed. She realized she'd backed herself into a logical corner. Victoria hadn't claimed to be anyone specific. She'd simply said she wasn't moving from her assigned seat. Marcus Vale appeared from the rear of the aircraft. 52 years old, with thinning gray hair and the bureaucratic bearing of middle management, he carried a thick folder labeled Security Protocols. His arrival seemed to embolden Sophia. "Mr. Vale, thank God you're here. This woman is—" "I can see the situation," Vale interrupted. He studied Victoria with the calculating look of someone who'd made similar assessments countless times before. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Vale, Operations Manager. I need to see all of your identification documents immediately." Victoria didn't move. "Why? Because we have protocols for dealing with suspicious passengers." "What makes me suspicious?" Vale glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "Your appearance is inconsistent with first-class passenger demographics. Your behavior suggests deception. And frankly, you don't look like someone who can afford a seat that costs $8,000. "I see. And what does someone who can afford an $8,000 seat look like? You know exactly what I mean." "No, Marcus, I don't. Please explain." The use of his first name hit Vale like Victoria had slapped him. Just like with Sophia, she knew his name without an introduction. His confidence wavered visibly. Well, professional appearance, appropriate attire, recognizable status indicators, such as expensive luggage, designer clothes, jewelry. So you determine who belongs in first class based on their outfit." Vale's face reddened. He was beginning to realize how his words sounded when spoken aloud. "It's not that simple. We have comprehensive screening procedures based on appearance, based on multiple factors. Name 3 factors that don't relate to how someone looks or dresses." Vale opened his folder frantically, searching for official language that might justify what was happening. Instead, he found himself staring at policies that were even more damning when read literally. Phrases like maintaining cabin ambiance and ensuring passenger comfort suddenly sounded like exactly what they were: coded discrimination. Elena Ramirez arrived carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who specialized in making problems disappear. 29, professionally dressed, she had the smooth confidence of a corporate PR specialist. "I'm Elena Ramirez from Customer Relations," she announced. "I understand we have a seating dispute. Let me see what I can do to resolve this amicably." "There's no dispute," Victoria said. "I'm in my assigned seat with a valid ticket." "Well, sometimes there are errors," Elena said with practiced smoothness. "Overbooking, duplicate assignments, technical glitches. These things happen. The good news is we have several excellent seats available in our premium economy section. I'd be happy to arrange an upgrade. An upgrade from economy to premium economy. With our compliments, of course, plus a travel voucher for the inconvenience," Elena Victoria said softly. "What makes you think I was originally in economy?" Elena blinked. I assumed, based on the situation, which is—" Elena looked around helplessly. Every question Victoria asked forced her to confront the assumptions underlying her response. She was trapped by her own biases. "Look," Sophia interjected, her patience exhausted. This is ridiculous. I don't care what games you're playing or how you know our names. Security is almost here, and when they arrive, you're gone. End of story. She turned to address the other passengers who had been watching with increasing fascination. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this extended delay. Some people think they can intimidate their way into seats they haven't paid for. Well, not on my watch. We maintain standards on executive airlines, and those standards exist to protect your comfort and safety. Several passengers exchanged glances. A woman in row 2 whispered to her husband. A businessman in row 3 had discreetly started recording with his phone. The confrontation had gone on long enough that people were beginning to question whether the crew's behavior was appropriate. Sophia Victoria said, her voice still calm despite everything that had happened. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I don't want to hear, "You have 30 seconds to step back and apologize." The words were spoken quietly, but they carried absolute certainty. Not a threat, not a demand. A simple statement of fact. Apologize. Sophia laughed harshly. To you, are you completely insane? 25 seconds. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, you're in no position to make demands or ultimatums. You're facing criminal charges. 20 seconds. Vale clutched his folder tighter. This is absurd. We don't negotiate with passengers who 15 seconds. Elena backed away slightly. Something in Victoria's voice had changed. Still calm, but with an undertone that suggested she knew something they didn't. 10 seconds. I've had enough of this, Sophia declared. She reached for Victoria's arm, intending to physically remove her from the seat. You're coming with me right now. 5 seconds. Stop counting, Rodriguez shouted. Time's up. Victoria pulled out her phone again and made a call, but this time she put it on speaker. Rebecca. It's time. Understood, Ms. Knight. Deploying now. The response came from a woman's voice that carried the crisp authority of a corporate executive. In the background, they could hear rapid footsteps and urgent conversations. Miss Knight Elena repeated weakly. The footsteps from the jet bridge had arrived. The aircraft door opened and James Mitchell entered. 38 former FBI, he moved with the purposeful confidence of law enforcement. Behind him came 3 people in expensive suits carrying briefcases and tablets. Good afternoon, Ms. Knight, Mitchell said. I'm sorry you had to endure this. Behind the executives came 2 airport security officers, followed by a woman with a press badge and a camera operator. The aircraft was suddenly filled with official-looking people who clearly knew exactly who Victoria was. Sophia's face went white. Ms. Knight. Allow me to introduce myself properly, Victoria said, standing slowly. I'm Victoria Knight, founder and CEO of Knight Technologies. As of 6 weeks ago, I'm also the owner of Executive Airlines. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's perfect composure crumbled. Rodriguez's authoritative bearing evaporated. Vale dropped his folder papers, scattering across the cabin floor. Elena's tablet slipped from her hands. That's impossible, Sophia whispered. James, could you please show them the documentation? Mitchell opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Acquisition contract dated 6 weeks ago. Transfer of ownership filed with the Federal Aviation Administration. Corporate documents establishing Ms. Knight as majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Executive Airlines. He handed copies to each crew member. Their hands shook as they read documents that couldn't be forged signatures, that couldn't be faked official seals, that confirmed their worst nightmare. I bought this airline, Victoria continued, because I received reports about exactly this type of behavior. Discrimination bias, harassment of passengers who don't fit your image of who belongs in premium cabins. We didn't know, Elena began. You didn't know who I was. But would it have mattered if I were any other passenger? Should it have mattered? None of them could answer. I've been investigating this company for months. What I found was a culture that profits from keeping certain people out. Training that teaches employees to judge passengers by appearance. Policies that enable discrimination while providing legal cover. Victoria gestured to the woman with the press badge. This is Sarah Miller from Aviation Weekly. She's been documenting everything that happened here today. Every word, every action, every assumption you made about who belongs in first class. You set us up, Sophia accused. I gave you a choice. You could have treated me with basic human dignity. You could have checked your records properly. You could have apologized when you realized you were wrong. Instead, you chose to escalate. You chose to humiliate. You chose to discriminate. But we were just doing our jobs. No, Sophia. You were revealing who you really are, and now the entire world is going to see it. Sarah Blake couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The 24-year-old travel influencer had boarded Flight 445 expecting to create routine content about Executive Airline's premium service. Instead, she was documenting what would become the most viral aviation story of the year. Guys, this is insane, she whispered to her phone camera, keeping the live stream focused on the confrontation while providing real-time commentary to her 200,000 followers. I'm literally watching flight crew discriminate against a passenger right now. She has a valid ticket for first class, but they're treating her like a criminal because of how she's dressed. The chat exploded with responses. OMG, is this really happening? Record everything. This is so messed up. What airline is this? Someone call the news. Sarah adjusted her angle to capture Sophia's increasingly aggressive behavior. When the flight attendant grabbed Victoria's arm, the live stream erupted with shocked comments and angry emojis. Did everyone see that? She just put her hands on a passenger. This is getting really serious. Sarah's follower count was climbing rapidly as viewers shared the stream. 200K became 250K, then 300K, then 400K. Carlos Mendoza, sitting 3 rows behind in seat 4C, was recording everything on TikTok. The 31-year-old marketing professional had initially pulled out his phone to capture what he thought would be a funny airline mishap. Now he was documenting something much more significant. His first video, posted when Sophia initially confronted Victoria, had already gained 50,000 views in 10 minutes. The caption read, "Flight attendant humiliating passenger in first class. This is so wrong, discrimination, #airline, #unacceptable." But it was his second video that really exploded. When Victoria revealed she owned the airline, Carlos captured Sophia's expression perfectly. The shock, the horror, the sudden understanding of what she had done. The video gained 100,000 views in its first 5 minutes online. Lisa Rodriguez, a digital journalist for Miami Herald, was on the flight working on a story about airport security. When she realized what was happening, she switched into breaking news mode. Her fingers flew across her phone keyboard as she live tweeted the incident. Thread, currently witnessing discrimination incident on Executive Airlines Flight 445. Crew refusing to seat black passenger in first class despite valid ticket. 112. Flight attendant claimed passenger's ticket was fake, demanded she move to economy. Captain, now involved, threatening to call police. 212. Other passengers recording incident. This is escalating quickly. Clear case of racial profiling happening in real time. 312. Update. Plot twist you won't believe. Passenger just revealed she owns the airline. Crew faces look like they've seen a ghost. 412. Each tweet was retweeted hundreds of times within minutes. The hashtags #Executive Airlines and #FlightShame began trending in Miami, then Florida, then nationally. On the aircraft, the crew members were beginning to realize they were being recorded. Sophia noticed Sarah's phone first. "Turn that off," she demanded. "You can't record without permission." "Actually, I can," Sarah replied, still streaming. "We're in a public space and I'm documenting discrimination. My followers have a right to know what's happening here." "Your followers?" Captain Rodriguez asked. 450,000 people are watching this live right now, Sarah said. The number was actually closer to 600,000, but she was too focused on the drama to check the exact count. Jessica Park turned pale. How many people it's trending on Twitter too, called out a passenger from row 2. Executive Airlines is getting destroyed in the comments. Carlos posted another TikTok update part 3. The crew just found out they're being live streamed to 500,000 people. They look sick. This woman really owns the airline, hat karma nasht ound hatch flight from hell. The video gained 200,000 views before he finished typing the caption. Lisa's Twitter thread had caught the attention of major news outlets. Her DMs filled with requests from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and aviation industry publications. She quickly sent a message to her editor. Drop everything. I'm sitting on the biggest aviation story of the year. Need photographer and video crew at MIA immediately. The social media explosion was happening faster than anyone could control. Passenger phones captured every angle of the confrontation. Multiple live streams showed different perspectives. TikTok videos spread across the platform like wildfire. Aviation industry groups started weighing in. The Association of Flight Attendants posted discrimination has no place in aviation. All passengers deserve dignity and respect regardless of appearance. Civil rights organizations shared the live streams with commentary about ongoing discrimination in air travel. The NAACP's official Twitter account posted, "This is why we need continued vigilance. Bias doesn't disappear just because someone can afford a first-class ticket." In Executive Airlines headquarters, the crisis management team was in emergency session. Social media monitoring software was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Stock price tracking showed the beginning of what would become a significant drop. Customer service phone lines were jammed with calls. "Sir, we're seeing unprecedented social media activity," a junior executive reported to the CEO. Multiple viral videos. 500,000 people watching live streams, trending topics in 12 major markets. How bad is it? The hashtag #Executive Airlines has appeared in over 100,000 tweets in the last hour. Sentiment analysis shows 97% negative. Meanwhile, on the aircraft, Marcus Vail was frantically trying to call corporate headquarters. His hands shook as he dialed numbers that kept going to voicemail. The crisis was moving faster than traditional communication channels could handle. "Nobody's answering," he told Elena. "The whole situation is out of control." Elena was monitoring social media on her own phone. "Marcus, look at this. We're trending worldwide. There are news crews heading to the airport." She showed him the screen. Videos of their confrontation with Victoria were being shared in multiple languages. International news outlets were picking up the story. Aviation industry blogs were publishing think pieces about discrimination in air travel. Sarah's live stream had reached 800,000 viewers. Her commentary was being quoted on Twitter. "This is the most shocking thing I've ever witnessed on a plane." The passenger handled herself with incredible grace while being publicly humiliated. Now the crew realizes they just discriminated against their own boss. You literally cannot make this stuff up. Carlos had posted 6 TikTok videos documenting different moments of the confrontation. Combined, they had over 2 million views. Other passengers were sharing their own recordings on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. The story was spreading beyond social media. CNN's aviation correspondent tweeted following developing story on Executive Airlines Flight 445. Multiple sources confirm viral discrimination incident, investigating reports that passenger owns the airline. Local Miami news stations dispatched crews to the airport. National networks put the story on their breaking news radar. Aviation industry publications prepared in-depth coverage about discrimination policies and corporate accountability. In first class, Sophia was experiencing the modern nightmare of viral shame in real time. Passengers showed her their phones with videos of her behavior. Comments poured in, calling her racist, unprofessional, and worse. Her face was being shared across the internet, attached to words like discriminatory flight attendant and airline bias. "This is ruining my life," she whispered to Jessica. "Our lives," Jessica corrected. "We're all in those videos." Captain Rodriguez was discovering that his authority meant nothing in the age of social media. No matter what he commanded or demanded, phones kept recording. The story kept spreading. His reputation was being destroyed in real time by people who would never know his name, but would forever remember his actions. Victoria watched the social media explosion with mixed emotions. Part of her felt vindicated. The world was seeing exactly what she had experienced. But she also knew that viral shame, once unleashed, was difficult to control. Lives were being destroyed, careers ended, reputations ruined. Still, she reminded herself that consequences were necessary. For too long, discrimination had been hidden, ignored, or excused. Sometimes it took public exposure to force real change. Ms. Knight Sarah called out during her live stream. "My followers want to know what you're planning to do about this." Victoria looked directly into the camera. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The comment exploded across social media. It was retweeted 50,000 times in an hour. News outlets quoted it in their headlines. It became the defining statement of the entire incident. By the time the aircraft door finally opened to let investigators and executives board, the story had reached every corner of the internet. Executive Airlines was trending in 15 countries. The live streams had collective viewership in the millions. Traditional media was scrambling to catch up with a story that social media had already made global. The age of hidden discrimination was over. Everything happened in the light now broadcast to the world in real time by passengers armed with phones and platforms. The crew of Flight 445 had just learned that lesson in the most public way possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the first-class cabin as cameras continued rolling and live streams captured every word. "What you've witnessed today isn't unusual. It's just usually hidden." James Mitchell stepped forward with his briefcase. Behind him, the executives from Knight Technologies arranged themselves with the precision of a military operation. Rebecca Torres, Victoria's chief operating officer, entered carrying a tablet that displayed real-time legal documentation. "Allow me to properly introduce the team," Victoria continued. "James Mitchell, Corporate Security; Rebecca Torres, Chief Operating Officer of Knight Technologies, and, as of today, Interim President of Executive Airlines. Our legal counsel from Morrison Blake & Associates, and representatives from the Federal Aviation Administration who will be conducting an immediate investigation." Sophia's legs gave out. She sank into an empty seat, staring at Victoria with the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse. "This can't be happening." "Oh, but it is said, Rebecca Torres," her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to corporate warfare. "Ms. Knight's acquisition of Executive Airlines was completed 6 weeks ago. During the due diligence process, we uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior that required immediate investigation." She handed Marcus Vale a tablet displaying financial documents, corporate filings, and regulatory approvals. "Everything is legal documented and officially registered with appropriate aviation authorities." Captain Rodriguez found his voice. If you own the airline, why didn't you identify yourself? Why go through this charade?" Victoria's expression remained calm, but something harder appeared in her eyes. "Because, Captain Rodriguez, I needed to see exactly how your crew treats passengers who don't meet your expectations. I needed to document the culture that allows discrimination to flourish under the guise of maintaining standards." She gestured to the hidden cameras that James Mitchell was now revealing throughout the cabin. "Every word, every action, every assumption has been recorded. This wasn't a charade. It was evidence collection." Elena Ramirez stepped forward desperately. "Ms. Knight, surely we can resolve this privately. If there have been misunderstandings, we can address them through proper channels, Elena. Victoria interrupted gently. You've spent 2 years making discrimination disappear through proper channels. You've reclassified bias incidents as misunderstandings, buried complaints in bureaucracy, and convinced victims that seeking justice wasn't worth the effort. Rebecca pulled up files on her tablet. Elena Ramirez, Customer Relations Manager. In the past 24 months, you've processed 347 discrimination complaints. Of those, 337 were dismissed as isolated incidents or policy misunderstandings. That's a 97% dismissal rate for bias claims. Elena's face went white. I was following company policy. You were enabling a culture of discrimination while providing corporate cover for inexcusable behavior. Marcus Vale tried to assert some authority. Now wait just a minute. If you have concerns about our policies, there are proper procedures for Marcus. Victoria said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a blade. You wrote those policies. You created training materials that teach employees to judge passengers by appearance. You've institutionalized bias while maintaining plausible deniability. James Mitchell handed Marcus a thick folder. Internal emails from your corporate account. Training documents you authored. Performance reviews where you praised employees for maintaining passenger standards and cabin demographics. Marcus opened the folder with shaking hands. Seeing his own words in print, coded language that had seemed professionally acceptable in private corporate communications, he realized how damning they appeared in the light of public scrutiny. You've been creating a paper trail of discrimination for years, Victoria continued. The only difference is that now it's evidence instead of policy. Sarah Blake, still live streaming to over 1 million viewers, couldn't contain herself. Ms. Knight, can you tell us what you plan to do now? Victoria turned to address the camera directly. I plan to rebuild this airline from the ground up. New training, new policies, new leadership, and most importantly, new culture. The live stream chat exploded with comments. Yes, justice. This is incredible. Make them pay. Change everything. But Victoria wasn't finished. She addressed the crew members who had humiliated her with the same calm dignity she'd maintained throughout their attacks. Sophia Winters, she said. The flight attendant looked up with tear-filled eyes. You're terminated effective immediately. Not because you didn't recognize me, but because you treated a passenger with contempt based solely on appearance. Please, Sophia whispered. This job is everything to me. I can change. I can be better. You had opportunities to be better. When I presented a valid boarding pass, you could have accepted it. When other passengers suggested you check the computer, you could have listened. When I remained calm and respectful despite your aggression, you could have reconsidered your assumptions. Victoria's voice remained gentle but implacable. Instead, you chose to escalate. You chose to humiliate. You chose to call security on a passenger whose only crime was not looking like your idea of first-class material. Rebecca Torres stepped forward with official termination documents. Your final paycheck will be issued within 72 hours. Your employment benefits end today. You have 10 minutes to collect personal items from crew areas. Captain Rodriguez straightened his shoulders, trying to maintain some dignity. If you're terminating me, I want it on record that I was following established protocols. Miguel Rodriguez Victoria interrupted. You're not just terminated. The FAA will be reviewing your pilot's license. You used your authority as captain to threaten a passenger with arrest for the crime of existing while black in first class. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. You saw a black woman in casual clothes and immediately assumed she was a criminal. You never checked passenger manifests, never verified policies, never questioned whether your crew might be wrong. James Mitchell produced another folder. Captain Rodriguez's flight records show a pattern of passenger incidents correlating with race and economic status. 14 formal complaints in 2 years, all involving minorities, all dismissed by company leadership. I was protecting airline security. You were protecting prejudice, Victoria replied, and now you'll face federal investigation for discrimination under color of authority. Jessica Park was crying openly now. Ms. Knight, I was just following orders. I didn't want to get involved. Please don't ruin my life over this. Victoria studied the young woman for a moment. Jessica, you chose to search my belongings publicly. You chose to support your colleagues' discrimination. You chose to remain silent when you could have spoken up. But I'm not racist. I don't hate anyone. Hate isn't required for discrimination, Jessica. Complicity is enough. Silence is enough. Standing by while others are humiliated is enough. Rebecca presented Jessica with her termination documents. Your career in aviation is over. We'll be notifying other airlines about the circumstances of your dismissal. David Thompson. The gate agent tried to slip away toward the aircraft door, but James Mitchell blocked his path. David Thompson. Victoria called. Your turn. The thin man turned around slowly, his face ashen. I was just doing my job. The computer showed a VIP passenger, but we get glitches all the time. I had to make a judgment call. You made a judgment based on skin color and clothing. You saw Victoria Knight VIP status on your screen and decided it must be an error because the woman in front of you was black. That's not... I wasn't thinking about race. Victoria pulled out her own tablet and displayed David's employment records. 2 years as a gate agent, 47 passenger complaints, all involving minorities. You've consistently flagged Black and Hispanic passengers for additional screening, questioned their credentials, and delayed their boarding. I was being thorough. You were being discriminatory. And now you're unemployed. Rebecca handed him his termination papers. Security will escort you from airport premises. Your access badges and airline credentials are permanently revoked. But Victoria wasn't finished with the revelations. She turned to address the passengers who had been recording everything. Marcus Vale and Elena Ramirez aren't just losing their jobs today. They're facing federal civil rights violations. Their actions weren't isolated incidents. They represent years of institutional discrimination that has affected thousands of passengers. Marcus stammered. You can't prove institutional anything. These were individual decisions by individual employees. Actually, we can prove it. James Mitchell produced a laptop and connected it to the aircraft's entertainment screens. The cabin screens filled with data statistics, email communications, training materials, performance reviews. Passenger screening data shows clear racial disparities. Internal communications reveal deliberate profiling policies. Training materials explicitly teach employees to judge passengers by appearance. Performance reviews reward employees for maintaining demographic balance in premium cabins. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Charts showing that minority passengers were selected for additional screening at 3 times the normal rate. Emails discussing how to remove undesirable passengers without obvious discrimination. Training videos that taught coded language for excluding people based on race while maintaining legal cover. This isn't about individual bias, Victoria explained to the cameras that were broadcasting to millions. This is about corporate culture that profits from exclusion. This is about an industry that has normalized discrimination by calling it customer service. Elena tried one final desperate argument. But our customer satisfaction scores were excellent. We were protecting the experience our passengers expected. You were protecting racism, Victoria said flatly. You were ensuring that certain passengers felt comfortable by making sure other passengers felt unwelcome. She stood and addressed the cameras directly. This is what discrimination looks like in 2024. Not burning crosses or segregated water fountains, but corporate policies that achieve the same result through professional language and plausible deniability. The live stream viewership had reached 1.5 million people. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. News outlets were preparing breaking news alerts. The story was spreading across every social media platform simultaneously. Rebecca Torres took over the presentation. Effective immediately, Executive Airlines is implementing comprehensive reforms. New anti-discrimination policies, mandatory bias training, independent oversight committees, and a passenger Bill of Rights. But more importantly, Victoria added, "We're changing the fundamental culture." Airlines exist to serve all passengers with dignity and respect, not to maintain artificial hierarchies based on appearance or background. Carlos Mendoza, still recording for TikTok, called out Miss Knight. "What message do you have for other airlines that might be watching this?" Victoria smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. The message is simple: discriminate at your own peril. In an age of smartphones and social media, bias can't hide. And when passengers own the companies you work for, accountability isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The terminated crew members sat in stunned silence, processing the complete destruction of their careers. Sophia stared at her hands, realizing that her face was now attached to viral videos about airline discrimination that would follow her forever. Rodriguez clutched his captain's wings, understanding that his flying days were over. Marcus and Elena contemplated legal bills and federal investigations that would consume years of their lives. But Victoria's focus had already shifted from punishment to prevention. Today marks the beginning of a new era in aviation. An era where dignity isn't determined by designer labels, where respect isn't rationed based on skin color, and where justice isn't delayed by corporate bureaucracy. The aircraft had become a courtroom, a newsroom, and a classroom all at once. Justice was being served in real-time broadcast to the world, documented for history. The age of hidden discrimination was ending, replaced by immediate accountability and transparent consequences. As investigators prepared to interview each crew member separately, and federal agents readied civil rights violation paperwork, Victoria sat back down in seat 1A. Not as a victim, but as an owner. Not to claim superiority, but to ensure equality. The transformation of an industry had begun with a simple question: who belongs in first class? Victoria Knight had just answered it. Everyone who treats others with dignity deserves to be treated with dignity in return. The Miami International Airport main terminal erupted into chaos as news of the incident spread beyond social media into traditional news coverage. Within 2 hours of Victoria's revelation, every major network had crews racing to the scene. The story had evolved from viral social media content into a national news event with international implications. Rebecca Torres stood before a hastily assembled press conference in the airport's media center. Behind her, a banner reading, "Executive Airlines, Unity Through Travel," was being replaced with new corporate branding in real time. Camera lights blazed as reporters from CNN, Fox News, NBC, CBS, BBC, and aviation industry publications filled every available seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca began, "what happened on Flight 445 today represents everything that Executive Airlines will no longer tolerate. Effective immediately, we are implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms in aviation history." She clicked a remote, displaying a presentation that had been prepared weeks in advance, but activated only after Victoria's undercover investigation was complete. First Executive Airlines is being rebranded as Unity Air, effective immediately. The old name represented exclusivity and hierarchy. Our new name represents our commitment to serving all passengers with equal dignity. The assembled journalists erupted with questions. "Ms. Torres, how long has this discrimination been going on? What are the legal consequences for the terminated employees? Will other airlines follow your lead? How much will these reforms cost?" Rebecca raised her hand for quiet. All terminated employees are facing federal civil rights investigations. The Department of Justice has opened a formal inquiry into discriminatory practices that may violate federal law. The FAA is conducting a comprehensive audit of our safety and service protocols. Meanwhile, on Flight 445, federal investigators were conducting individual interviews with each terminated crew member. The interviews were being recorded for potential criminal proceedings and civil lawsuits. Sophia Winters sat in an airport security office, mascara streaked down her cheeks, facing FBI Special Agent Patricia Williams. The agent's questioning was methodical and devastating. Ms. Winters, your personnel file shows 14 complaints about discriminatory behavior in the past 2 years. Can you explain why minority passengers consistently reported feeling unwelcome in your sections? I don't know. Maybe they were more sensitive or looking for problems. Or maybe you treated them differently. Your own supervisor noted in performance reviews that you were excellent at maintaining cabin demographics. What did that mean? Sophia's attorney, hastily hired and still reviewing the case files, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Agent Williams, my client was following company-established protocols that appear to violate federal civil rights law. The agent replied. Ms. Winters, did anyone ever train you to judge passengers by their appearance? The question hung in the air. Sophia realized that any answer would be incriminating. If she admitted to appearance-based training, she was acknowledging discrimination. If she denied it, the extensive documentation would prove her wrong. Captain Rodriguez faced even more severe questioning. His pilot's license wasn't just being reviewed, it was being suspended pending investigation. The FAA took discrimination by aircraft commanders very seriously, especially when it involved threats to remove passengers based on race. Captain Rodriguez said, FAA Inspector General Maria Santos, you threatened to have Ms. Knight arrested for criminal fraud. What evidence did you have that any crime had been committed? She didn't look like she belonged in first class. Her clothing, her demeanor, her race. That's not what I said, but it's what you meant. Your communication logs show you've requested passenger removals 23 times in 2 years. 18 of those passengers were minorities. Can you explain this statistical anomaly? Rodriguez's attorney interrupted. Inspector Santos' correlation doesn't prove causation. Actually, in civil rights law, statistical patterns are considered strong evidence of discriminatory intent. Your client may face federal charges. The legal consequences were mounting rapidly. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division had opened a pattern and practice investigation into Executive Airlines. Individual crew members faced potential criminal charges for deprivation of civil rights under color of authority. Civil lawsuits from previously discriminated passengers were being filed hourly. But the most immediate consequence was social media justice. Sophia's face had become the internet's symbol of airline discrimination. Her image appeared in memes, reaction videos, and social commentary across every platform. The hashtag #SophiaWinters was trending alongside #Executive Airlines and #Airline Discrimination. A Twitter account called @AirlineEquality had compiled every video angle of the incident into a comprehensive timeline showing exactly how Sophia's behavior escalated. The thread was retweeted 200,000 times in 6 hours. Carlos Mendoza's TikTok videos had gained over 5 million views collectively. His final video showing Sophia's face when she realized Victoria owned the airline became the platform's most shared aviation content ever. Comments poured in from around the world. Justice served airplane emojis. This is what accountability looks like. Fire emoji. Never judge a book by its cover. Book emoji. Karma is beautiful. Sarah Blake's live stream had been watched by 2.3 million people at its peak. Major news outlets were licensing her footage for broadcast. Her follower count had exploded to over 800,000 as people sought the original source of the story. Guys, this is absolutely insane, she told her camera from the airport terminal. I've never seen anything like this. The entire airline industry is talking about what happened. Other flight attendants are reaching out to share their own stories about pressure to discriminate. The ripple effects were spreading throughout the aviation industry. Other airlines were hastily reviewing their own training materials and discrimination complaint procedures. Employee unions were issuing statements about the importance of treating all passengers fairly. Civil rights organizations were calling for industry-wide reforms. Elena Ramirez discovered that her career in corporate communications was over before she left the airport. During her FBI interview, investigators revealed that they had been monitoring discrimination complaints across multiple airlines. Her name appeared in federal databases as someone who had helped cover up bias incidents. Ms. Ramirez said the federal prosecutor assigned to the case you processed 347 discrimination complaints and dismissed 337 of them. We've identified at least 40 cases where passengers faced clear racial bias that you reclassified as misunderstandings. I was following company policy, Elena repeated weakly. Company policy that violated federal law. Your actions enabled discrimination on a massive scale. You may face conspiracy charges for denying civil rights. Marcus Vail faced the most serious consequences of all. As operations manager, he had created and implemented the discriminatory policies that other employees followed. The DOJ was considering charging him under the federal conspiracy statute for organizing a pattern of civil rights violations. His interview with federal investigators lasted 8 hours. They presented emails he'd written about maintaining passenger quality training materials he'd authored about demographic management and performance reviews, where he praised employees for keeping undesirables out of premium cabins. Mr. Vail said the lead prosecutor, "You created an arrangement designed to exclude passengers based on race while maintaining plausible deniability. That's textbook conspiracy to deprive civil rights. It wasn't about race. It was about maintaining brand standards, customer comfort, premium experience. All coded language for racial exclusion. We have 47 victims prepared to testify that your policies resulted in discriminatory treatment based solely on race. The criminal charges would take months to finalize, but the social consequences were immediate. All 5 terminated employees found themselves unemployable in the aviation industry. Their names appeared on industry-wide blacklists. Professional networking sites removed their profiles. Even their families faced social media harassment as the story continued spreading. But Victoria's reforms went far beyond punishment. Unity Air's transformation was happening in real-time broadcast live across social media and news networks. We're not just changing policies, Victoria announced at the press conference. We're changing the physics of air travel. From this day forward, every Unity Air employee will be trained by civil rights experts. Every passenger complaint will be investigated by independent oversight. Every discrimination allegation will be published transparently. Rebecca Torres displayed the new training program on screen. Every employee from pilots to gate agents to executives will complete 40 hours of bias recognition and prevention training. Customer service representatives will be evaluated based on equitable treatment of all passengers, regardless of appearance or background. The reforms were comprehensive and immediate. Independent civil rights monitors on every flight. Anonymous reporting for discrimination. Public complaint. Databases with transparent resolution. Mandatory bias training for all employees. Zero tolerance policies with automatic termination. Passenger Bill of Rights posted in every aircraft. Community oversight committees for company policies. But most importantly, Victoria continued, we're proving that accountability is possible in real time. Social media has ended the era of hidden discrimination. When bias happens in public, consequences must be public too. The terminated employees watched the press conference from airport holding areas, waiting for lawyers and facing the complete destruction of their professional lives. They had become cautionary tales about the cost of discrimination in the smartphone age. Sophia realized she would never work in customer service again. Her face was too recognizable, her actions too well documented, her choices too public. The career she had built was destroyed in a single day by her own prejudice. Rodriguez understood that his flying days were over. No airline would hire a pilot under federal investigation for civil rights violations. The authority he had wielded so confidently was gone forever. Marcus, Elena, and David faced years of legal battles, federal investigations, and civil lawsuits. Their actions had been documented so thoroughly that defense would be nearly impossible. But the story's most powerful consequence wasn't punishment. It was transformation. Within hours of the incident, other passengers began sharing their own experiences of airline discrimination. My Flight Story became a global conversation about bias in travel. A black businessman tweeted, "I've been randomly selected for additional screening on 47 of my last 50 flights. Today, I understand it wasn't random." A Hispanic family posted, "We were told our valid tickets were mistakes and moved to separate seats. Now I know why." An elderly Sikh passenger shared, "Flight crews always question my boarding pass, no matter which airline." Today's video explains everything. The conversation had moved beyond a single incident to examine an entire culture of discrimination that passengers had experienced, but airlines had hidden. Victoria's courage in documenting bias had given voice to thousands of previously silenced experiences. Unity Air's customer service lines were flooded with calls from passengers, sharing discrimination stories and requesting investigations. Instead of hiding these complaints, Victoria ordered them published online with company responses and resolution details. "Transparency isn't comfortable," she told reporters, "but it's necessary. Passengers deserve to know how their complaints are handled and whether justice is possible. The airline industry would never be the same. The age of hidden bias was ending, replaced by immediate accountability and public consequences. What happened to Flight 445's crew would be remembered forever as the day discrimination faced justice in real time." Other airlines scrambled to review their own practices, terrified of becoming the next viral discrimination story. The message was clear: treat all passengers with dignity, or face the consequences in the most public way possible. 6 months after the Flight 445 incident, Victoria Knight stood in the newly renovated Unity Air headquarters in Chicago, looking out at a transformed company culture that had become the gold standard for the entire aviation industry. The changes went far beyond policy adjustments. They represented a fundamental shift in how air travel operated in America. The statistics told the story of transformation. Unity Air's customer satisfaction ratings had soared to industry-leading levels. Discrimination complaints had dropped to virtually zero. Most remarkably, profitability had increased by 37%, as the airline attracted passengers who had previously avoided air travel due to discriminatory treatment. The business case for equality isn't just moral, it's mathematical. Victoria explained to a gathering of aviation executives from around the world who had come to study Unity Air's revolutionary approach. When you treat all customers with dignity, you expand your market instead of restricting it. Maria Santos, the former ground crew worker who had been promoted to Vice President of Employee Relations, presented data that challenged every assumption the industry had held about customer demographics. Under the old discriminatory arrangement, executive airlines had served a narrow, shrinking customer base. Unity Air served everyone and revenue had exploded. "We discovered that artificial exclusivity was actually limiting profitability," Maria explained. "When you remove barriers based on appearance and bias, you access customer segments that competitors can't reach." The federal investigation had concluded with landmark civil rights settlements. Sophia Winters, Captain Rodriguez, and Marcus Vale had been convicted of federal civil rights violations. Their cases became legal precedents that fundamentally changed how discrimination in transportation was prosecuted. But Victoria's focus had moved beyond punishment to prevention. Unity Air's transformation had inspired industry-wide changes that made discrimination practically impossible and commercially stupid. The Community Heroes Initiative had evolved into something unprecedented in aviation. 50% of first-class seats on every Unity Air flight were reserved for teachers, firefighters, nurses, veterans, and social workers nominated by their communities. The program had waiting lists months long and had inspired similar initiatives at hotels, restaurants, and other service industries. "These are the people who actually keep our society functioning," Victoria said during a speech at the International Aviation Conference. "They deserve recognition and respect, not judgment based on whether their uniform is designer or industrial." Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric nurse from Detroit, was boarding Unity Air Flight 847 to Boston. 3 years ago, she had been humiliated by airline staff who questioned whether she belonged in first class despite having a valid ticket. Today, she was traveling in the front of the plane as recognition for her work saving children's lives. "I never thought I'd see change like this in my lifetime, Doctor," Chen told the flight crew as she settled into her seat. "You've proven that dignity isn't about what you can afford. It's about what you contribute." The crew member who greeted her was James Wilson, a former gate agent who had been retrained under Unity Air's comprehensive bias prevention program. 6 months of intensive education about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and equitable service had transformed him from someone who made assumptions based on appearance into an advocate for inclusive travel. "Dr. Chen, it's an honor to serve you today," James said with genuine respect. "Your nomination letter from the hospital described how you worked 18-hour shifts during the pandemic. Heroes like you make everyone else's job easier." The transformation had rippled throughout the industry. Other airlines, terrified of becoming the next viral discrimination story, had implemented their own bias prevention programs. The Federal Aviation Administration had mandated anti-discrimination training for all airline employees. Congress had passed legislation requiring transparency in complaint resolution. But the most powerful change was cultural. The smartphone generation had ended the age of hidden bias by making discrimination immediate, public, and permanent. Airline employees knew that every interaction was potentially being recorded, shared, and scrutinized by millions of people. Carlos Mendoza, whose TikTok videos had helped expose the Flight 445 incident, had become a leading voice for passenger rights. His follow-up content documenting positive changes in aviation had gained him 3 million followers and a job as Unity Air's Director of Social Media Transparency. What happened 6 months ago proved that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they're willing to document injustice, Carlos said in his latest video recorded aboard a Unity Air flight. "Every passenger with a phone is a potential civil rights investigator." The legal consequences for the terminated employees had been severe but fair. Sophia Winters had served 4 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and was now working as a warehouse clerk forever banned from the aviation industry. Her story had become required viewing in bias prevention training programs across the country. Captain Rodriguez had lost his pilot's license permanently and faced ongoing civil lawsuits from passengers he had discriminated against over the years. His case had established legal precedent that airline employees with authority could be prosecuted for civil rights violations under federal conspiracy statutes. Marcus Vail's conviction for organizing discriminatory practices had sent shockwaves through airline management. Executive-level employees could no longer hide behind corporate policies when those policies violated civil rights. Personal accountability had been established at every level of the industry. But Victoria's proudest achievement wasn't punishment. It was prevention. Unity Air had become living proof that equality wasn't just morally right, but economically smart. The airline's success had inspired transformation across the travel industry. Hotels had adopted similar transparency requirements for discrimination complaints. Car rental companies had implemented bias prevention training. Even restaurants and retail stores had begun publishing diversity and inclusion metrics to avoid becoming the next viral discrimination story. The smartphone changed everything, Victoria explained to a gathering of civil rights leaders. Discrimination can't hide anymore. Every bias incident is potentially global news within minutes. That's created powerful incentives for institutional change. On a chilly December morning exactly 1 year after the Flight 445 incident, Victoria walked through Unity Air's main terminal at Chicago O'Hare. The space buzzed with diverse passengers traveling to destinations around the world. Children of all backgrounds played in family areas. Elderly passengers received respectful assistance, regardless of their appearance. Business travelers worked side by side without the artificial hierarchies that had once divided premium and economy sections. She paused at gate B7, where Unity Air Flight 445, the same flight number from that transformational day, was preparing for departure to Miami. The crew was led by Captain Jennifer Martinez, a Hispanic pilot who had been promoted after the old discriminatory management was removed. Ms. Knight, Captain Martinez said, approaching with genuine warmth. "Are you flying with us today?" "Actually, yes," Victoria replied. "Seat 34C. The same seat Sophia Winters tried to force you into?" "Exactly. I want to make sure the service is excellent in every row." Victoria boarded the aircraft and walked past the first-class section where teachers, firefighters, and veterans were being served with the same dignity once reserved only for the wealthy. She continued to the back of the plane and took her seat in the last row next to a young mother traveling alone with twin toddlers. "Are you sure you want to sit here?" the woman asked, recognizing Victoria despite her casual clothes and simple appearance. "I mean, you own the plane." Victoria smiled and buckled her seatbelt as the engines hummed to life. "If this seat is good enough for my customers, it's good enough for me. Besides, I learned something important a year ago. Dignity isn't about where you sit. It's about how you treat the person sitting next to you." As the aircraft lifted into the clouds above Chicago, Victoria reflected on the journey from that confrontational morning in Miami to this moment of quiet satisfaction. She had transformed an airline, changed an industry, and proved that justice was possible when people were willing to document injustice and demand accountability. The teenage boy across the aisle was watching videos on his phone. Carlos Mendoza's latest content about passenger rights and airline transparency. The businessman in front of her was reading a news article about Unity Air's record profits and industry-leading customer satisfaction. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, treating every passenger with the same professional respect, regardless of age, race, or apparent wealth. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge or punishment, but transformation. Not destroying enemies, but creating friends. Not dividing people, but bringing them together around shared values of dignity and respect. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Unity Air Flight 445, Captain Martinez announced over the intercom. We're honored to serve passengers from all backgrounds and destinations today. As we always say at Unity Air, we don't just fly together, we rise together." Victoria closed her eyes and smiled. The battle against discrimination would never be completely won, but today's flight proved that progress was possible when people chose courage over comfort, justice over convenience, and equality over exclusivity. Power, she had learned, wasn't about the seat you occupied, but about ensuring everyone had the right to sit with dignity. And on Unity Air Flight 445, climbing through the clouds toward a better tomorrow, that principle wasn't just a policy. It was a promise kept every single day. Victoria Knight proved that true change doesn't require a loud voice or dramatic gestures. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with someone who refuses to move from where they belong. Her quiet strength transformed not just an airline, but an entire industry's understanding of dignity and respect. If this story moved you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look or where they come from, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button to show support for stories that matter. These are the stories that change hearts and minds, and your like tells YouTube to share this message with even more people who need to hear it. Second, subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. We share powerful stories about ordinary people standing up for what's right, and you don't want to miss a single one. When you subscribe, you're joining a community that believes in justice, equality, and the power of one person to change everything. Third, and this is the most important part, share this video. Share it with your family, your friends, your coworkers. Share it on your social media. Send it to that person who needs to be reminded that their dignity matters. Because Victoria Knight's story proves that when good people stand together, discrimination doesn't stand a chance. Remember, every time you choose kindness over prejudice, every time you speak up instead of staying silent, every time you treat someone with dignity instead of judgment, you're continuing Victoria's legacy. You're proving that the content of someone's character matters more than the color of their skin or the clothes they wear. The next time you see injustice, ask yourself, what would Victoria do? Then do it. Because the power to change the world isn't in the hands of billionaires or politicians. It's in your hands. It's in mine. It's in all of us, one choice at a time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution. Until next time, remember, we don't just fly together, we rise together.